The boy arrived on a Thursday evening in November, when the fog off the Thames had crept north to settle into the valley below Colchester Hall, and the gatekeeper was on his third cup of something stronger than tea. His name, he said, was James. He was 7 years old, perhaps 8. He had walked from the village coaching inn with a canvas bag smaller than most men's correspondence satchels, a letter sealed with plain wax, addressed in a woman's hand to His Grace, the Duke of Colchester, and around his neck, on a piece of household string, a locket that had not been made for household string. The locket had been made for a woman's throat, gold, small, oval, with a clasp the gatekeeper could not open, because his hands were too large and too cold, and on the front of it, engraved in the particular careful script of a jeweler who had been asked to do his best work, 2 letters, A. Charles Alden, the Duke of Colchester's initials. The gatekeeper, whose name was Briggs, and who had served the Colchester estate for 22 years, looked at the locket for a long time in the lamplight of the gatehouse. Then he looked at the boy's face. Then he sent for the Duke. Charles Alden, the 6th Duke of Colchester, had been back from India for 11 weeks. He had come back thinner than he had left, quieter than anyone who had known him remembered him being, and with the particular careful stillness of a man who has spent 3 years watching things go wrong at a distance and has arrived home to find that they have been going wrong considerably closer to him than he knew. He was, by the assessment of everyone who had ever borrowed money from him, a good man. He was, by the assessment of his solicitor, too good a man, by precisely the margin that had allowed his cousin Reginald to spend 3 years mismanaging the Colchester estate accounts with the patient efficiency of a man who had been waiting his entire adult life for the Duke to be definite. Somewhere else. He was 34. He had never married. He had, 11 years earlier, at the age of 23, loved a woman named Elizabeth Marsh, the daughter of a Gloucestershire clergyman, with the complete and unguarded heart of a young man who did not yet understand that an unguarded heart was an invitation. He had been told, 6 weeks after he left for his first colonial posting, that Elizabeth had died of fever. He had believed it because the letter had come from his cousin Reginald, whom he had trusted since boyhood, and because grief, in his experience, did not arrive with a secondary investigation. He was summoned to the gate at 8:30 on a Thursday evening in November, and found a boy sitting on the gatekeeper's stool, eating bread that Briggs had produced from somewhere, with a canvas bag at his feet and a locket on a piece of string around his neck. The boy looked up when the Duke came in. Charles Alden had not seen his own face at the age of 7. He had, however, seen the portrait of his father at 7 that hung in the long gallery, and his father at 7 had had exactly this boy's jaw, exactly this boy's brow, and exactly this boy's eyes, which were gray with a darker ring at the outer edge, the precise color of the Colchester eyes that appeared in every portrait in the long gallery going back 4 generations. He stood very still in the door of the gatehouse. Briggs said nothing. He had the good sense of a man who had been a gatekeeper for 22 years, which was the sense to recognize when a gate had already been opened and his opinion of it was no longer required. The boy swallowed his bread. He looked at the Duke with the direct, assessing look of a child who has been told to find a specific man and has been given a description that appears to be accurate. "Are you the Duke?" he said. Charles said that he was. "My mother said to give you this." He held out the letter with both hands. The way a child holds something it has been told is important and has been careful with for a long time. Charles took it. He did not open it immediately. He looked at the boy. "What is your name?" "James," the boy said. "James Marsh." The name landed in the quiet of the cottage, the way a stone lands in still water, not loudly, but with the precise expanding consequence of a thing dropped from a height. Marsh, Elizabeth's name. He sat down on the chair across from the boy, because his legs had made the decision before his mind had, and he opened the letter. Elizabeth Marsh had not died of fever in the autumn of 1836. She had, in the autumn of 1836, discovered that she was with child. She had written to Charles. The letter had not reached him. She had written a second time. That letter had also not reached him. On the third attempt, she had presented herself at the London office of the Colchester solicitors, where she had been received by a clerk who had shown her into a side room and excused himself, and returned not with a solicitor, but with Mr. Reginald Alden, the Duke's cousin and estate manager, who had explained to her, with the courtesy of a man performing a mercy, that the Duke had, during his posting, become engaged to a young woman of appropriate station in Calcutta, and that her letters had therefore been intercepted at the Duke's own instruction, as he had not wished to cause her unnecessary distress. He had then, with the same courtesy, offered her £200 and a cottage in Shropshire, and the understanding that the child, when born, would be provided for at a distance, provided she made no further attempt to contact the Duke or the Colchester estate. Elizabeth had accepted because she had no money, no family beyond an elderly father in poor health, and because she had believed, with the complete and unguarded heart of a woman who has loved unwisely and well, that the man she loved had chosen someone else. She had raised James alone in Shropshire for 7 years. She had made the £200 last with the careful economies of a clergyman's daughter who had grown up understanding the precise difference between what a household needed and what it wanted. She had died 6 weeks ago of a genuine fever, not the invented one of 11 years earlier, and she had died with enough time to write the letter and enough presence of mind to place the locket on its household string around her son's neck, and tell him the name of his father and the address of his father's house, and to be sure, James, to give the letter only to the Duke himself, no one else, not a servant, not a cousin. The Duke, by name, by face, by no one else. She had clearly known, even at the end, that there were doors in Colchester Hall that would be closed to this boy if the wrong person opened them first. She had known because she had learned it 11 years ago in a side room in London. Charles read the letter twice. He read it the second time with the flat, careful attention of a man, ensuring that he has understood each word individually, because there was something in him that wanted to find the sentence that meant something different from what he had read the first time, and there was no such sentence. He folded the letter. He looked at the boy. James had finished his bread and was watching the Duke with the patient, watchful stillness of a child who has learned in recent weeks that stillness is what adults require from you when they are thinking about something that concerns you and has not yet been said. James, Charles said. How old are you? 7, James said. I will be 8 in March. March 1840. Charles did his arithmetic with the precision of a man who wished he had not. The numbers were correct. The numbers were, in fact, exact. He reached across and laid his hand briefly on the boy's head. The way a man touches something he is still in the process of believing is real. Are you hungry? He said. More than the bread? James considered this with the honesty of a child who has not yet learned to understate his requirements. Yes, he said. Come then, said the Duke of Colchester to his son, and stood and held out his hand, and the boy took it without hesitation, with the directness of a child who has been told, "This man is your father," and has decided, on the available evidence of the past 10 minutes, that the description was accurate. They walked up from the gate to the house together in the November fog. Miss Clara Sutton had arrived at Colchester Hall 4 days earlier, at the request of the family solicitor, Mr. Hale, who was one of the 3 men in the county who understood precisely how badly Reginald Alden had managed the estate accounts, and one of the 2 sufficiently troubled by it to act, and the only one who had thought to ask Clara. She was 31. She was the daughter of a Northumberland land agent who had taught her his work from the age of 12, because he had no sons, and she had, as he frequently observed, a better head for numbers than any clerk he had ever employed. Since her father's death 6 years earlier, she had managed 3 separate estates in the north, to the considerable profit of their owners, and the considerable surprise of everyone who had initially objected to a woman in the appointment. She had been given a desk in the small estate office off the main corridor, and access to every ledger Reginald had kept. She had been working through them for 4 days, with the quiet, relentless attention of a woman who had learned to read a ledger the way some people read faces, and what she had read in Reginald Alden's ledgers had caused her to write 6 pages of careful notes and sleep very poorly. She was in the estate office at 9:30 on Thursday evening, because she had the habit of working after the house quieted, and because one particular ledger contained a discrepancy she wanted to resolve before she slept, when she heard the sound of a child's voice in the corridor. She looked up, she listened. The voice was answering a question with the honesty of a child who has not yet learned to moderate the directness of his answers for adult comfort. She heard the Duke's voice, lower, patient. She heard Mrs. Dove, the housekeeper, making the swift, decisive sounds of a woman rerouting the evening's domestic arrangements without complaint. She returned to the ledger, but the voice of the child stayed at the edge of her attention like a note held in a room after the instrument has stopped. In the morning she came down to find the Duke at the long table, with the boy seated beside him, eating porridge with the efficient focus of a child making up for several days of insufficient meals. The Duke was watching him with the careful, wondering attention of a man who has been handed something he does not yet know how to hold, but has already decided he will not put down. He looked up when Clara came in. He had spoken to her twice in 4 days, both times briefly, with the distracted courtesy of a man who had returned from India to find his estate in disorder and had not yet finished the inventory of what had been lost. He had given her the office and the ledgers and said, with the direct simplicity she had noted as his characteristic, that he trusted Hale's judgment and that she should tell him when she had found what she came to find. He said her name now across the table, and she gave him hers and looked at the boy. "This is James," the Duke said. Clara looked at James. She had the particular gift of a woman who has managed estates for 6 years of reading a room by its arrangement rather than its announcement. She noted the gray eyes, the brow, the way the Duke was sitting, slightly angled toward the boy with the unconscious orientation of a man who has already, without deciding to, placed something in the category of things I will not let harm come to. She sat down. She said good morning to James, who answered with his mouth still containing porridge, and then remembered himself and swallowed, and said it again more carefully. "Your Grace," she said, "when you have finished breakfast, I would be grateful for an hour in the estate office." He looked at her over the table with the direct, steady look of a man who understood that an hour requested in that particular tone was not about the accounts. "At 10, he said. She had laid the ledgers in 3 columns on the desk, not in the order they were found, but in the order they argued. She stood rather than sat, because she had learned that a woman who sits when delivering difficult information to a man in his own house will spend half the conversation managing the comfort of the situation rather than the content of it. She began with the rents. The Colchester estate held 14 tenant farms across 3 parishes. In the 3 years the Duke had been in India, the recorded rents had declined by a third. She had spoken to 2 tenant farmers the previous afternoon on the pretext of a walk, and both had confirmed that their rents had not in fact declined. They had been paying precisely what they always paid. The discrepancy between what had been collected and what had been recorded was £940 over 3 years. She showed him the column. He looked at it without speaking, and she let him look, because she had noted in 4 days that he had the habit of not speaking until he had finished thinking, which was a habit she respected and did not interrupt. "That is Reginald's hand," he said. "Yes, for 3 years. The pattern begins, in fact, 4 years before your posting, the year after your father died." He looked up at her then, and she held his eyes steadily, because what she was about to show him required a woman who did not look away. She showed him the second column. The estate timber rights on the northern parcel had been sold in 1839 to a logging concern whose principal investor, discovered through a letter misfiled with deliberate care beneath a routine drainage report, was a Mr. R.A. Those initials matched no one in the drainage company's public records. They matched precisely the man who had filed the sale. The sale had been recorded as a loss. The estate had received £400. The timber was worth 3 times that. "He sold your timber to himself," she said, with no inflection, because inflection would have been unnecessary. The Duke was very still. She showed him the 3rd column. She had saved it because it was the one she had been uncertain about showing him, and had shown it because the boy was in the house, and the boy's existence meant the 3rd column was no longer a historical injury, but an ongoing one. The third column was a series of payments, small ones, quarterly, beginning in December 1836, made from a miscellaneous household account to a firm of Shropshire solicitors. She had traced the firm through the law list and the county directories to a single retired partner who handled, in his retirement, correspondence for a small number of private clients. The payments had stopped 6 weeks ago. She did not explain why they had stopped. She did not need to. The Duke had read Elizabeth Marsh's letter the previous evening. He was a man of sufficient intelligence to follow the arithmetic of a payment that began in December 1836 and stopped the week a woman in Shropshire died. He knew, the Duke said. His voice was quiet and absolutely level, the way a man's voice goes when the thing he is saying is too large for the room he is saying it in. He knew about James from the beginning. He arranged it from the beginning, Your Grace. She kept her own voice level to match his. The interception of Miss Marsh's letters, the settlement, the payments to monitor the arrangement, and the false report of her death that reached you in India? She paused. I have not yet found the specific letter, but the payments tell their own account. He told me Elizabeth died. Yes, I believed him for 11 years. She did not answer that. There was nothing useful that could be said to 11 years of a wrong grief, and she understood the difference between a silence that needed filling and a silence that needed leaving alone. She left it alone. He stood at the desk for a long time, with his hands resting on the columns, looking at them. She watched him with the same attention she had given the ledgers, reading the precise quality of what was moving through him. It was not the sharp grief of surprise. It was the slower, more durable grief of confirmation. The grief of a man who has felt for 11 years that something was wrong and has now been shown with columns of figures exactly what it was. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were steady. What do I do? She had been waiting for that question, not because she had assumed he would ask it, but because she had spent 4 days preparing the answer in the event that he did. First, she said, you do nothing that can be undone. Reginald does not know that I have found this. He does not know the boy is here. You have, at this moment, the advantage of preparation. Do not surrender it for the satisfaction of confronting him before you are ready. Second, you retain Mr. Hale and instruct him to apply for James's formal recognition through the ecclesiastical records. Miss Marsh was never married. The boy bears her name. The letter in your possession, combined with the locket and the evidence any court would find unremarkable, constitutes a sufficient foundation. She was a clergyman's daughter, he said. She was the most honest person I have ever known. Then the court will find the matter straightforward. Third, I would ask your permission to write 2 letters today. One to the Shropshire solicitors, requesting all correspondence they hold on behalf of the arrangement. They are not party to fraud. They were engaged to administer a settlement. They will produce the correspondence if properly requested by a Duke's solicitor. She paused. The second letter is to a Mr. Thomas Vane of the London Gazette, who has been for 2 years documenting a pattern of estate mismanagement among proxy administrators. The Duke looked at her. You are very thorough. Reginald Alden has been managing ducal property for 7 years, she said, with the specific confidence of a man who believes the person above him is too good to look down. She did not soften it. The ledgers are the proof. The letters from Shropshire are the specificity. Mr. Vane is the consequence that cannot be quietly settled. He was quiet. Outside the estate office window, the November grounds lay gray and still. And then, from somewhere above them, came the sound of a boy's footstep crossing a floor in an uncertain direction. The footstep of a child exploring a house he did not yet know was his. Both of them heard it. Neither of them spoke to it, but it sat between them in the office for the rest of the conversation, like a small and particular fact. He was my friend, the Duke said at last. Before he was my cousin, before any of this, when we were boys, he was my closest friend. I.N. Clara did not say what she could have said. She said instead, simply, yes, one word, the acknowledgement of the loss, without the editorial. She had found across 6 years of difficult conversations that it was the only useful response to a good man, being shown evidence of a betrayal by someone he had loved. He straightened. He looked at the columns one last time, and then at her. Write the letters. Both of them. Use my seal. He paused at the door. And, Miss Sutton, Your Grace, James will need a tutor before spring. Will you, when you have finished with the ledgers, be willing to stay until I have found one? It was a practical question, wearing the clothes of a practical question. She had learned in 4 days to read the distance between what this man said and what he meant, which was the same skill as reading ledgers, applied to a different kind of account. I will stay, she said, until you no longer need the ledgers read. He gave her then the small, brief, genuine half-smile of a man who has been managing alone for a very long time and has recognized, without yet knowing what to do with the recognition, that he is not any longer. He left her to the letters. In the days that followed, it was James who kept the house from becoming only a legal proceeding. He appeared at breakfast each morning with the reliable punctuality of a child who has decided that meals are one thing he can be certain of, and he ate with the focused efficiency of a boy, making up for 7 years of careful economies. He asked questions without preamble about the portraits in the long gallery, about the horses, about the large dog that had appeared at the kitchen door on the second morning and had not left since. He referred to the Duke, in these early days, not as father but as sir, with the careful formality of a child who has been told something is true and is waiting for more evidence before he commits to it. On the 4th morning, James appeared at the door of the estate office while Clara was working. He stood in the doorway without coming in, studying the desk with the particular attention of a child who has been taught, somewhere in 7 years of a small cottage, that other people's work deserves a moment of observation before it is interrupted. What are those? He said, indicating the ledgers. Accounts, Clara said. Records of what has come in and gone out of this estate. Like my mother's household book? Clara looked at him. Yes, she said, exactly like that. He came into the room then, with the permission of the answer, and stood at her shoulder and looked at the columns. He smelled of cold air and horse, which meant he had been at the stables with the groom and had come directly here without telling anyone. That number is written twice, he said, pointing at the 3rd column. Clara looked. He was correct. A duplication she had not yet noted. She did not make much of it. She wrote the correction without ceremony, because he had made the observation without ceremony, and both of them were, she was beginning to understand, the kind of person who found things without requiring applause for the finding. He stayed for another quarter hour, watching her work in the same quiet way he had watched the Duke that first evening in the gatehouse, as if observation were itself a form of participation. When he left, he said goodbye before he went, which was a small and specific thing his mother had clearly taught him. Clara sat for a moment after he had gone and looked at the column he had corrected. She had a feeling, with the precision of a woman who trusted her own arithmetic, that the boy who had arrived in the November fog with a locket and a canvas bag was going to be very much all right. That evening the Duke came to the door of the estate office at 8:30, which was the hour she habitually worked after the house settled. He had come twice before, both times with estate questions. This time he came with 2 cups of coffee and said, with the careful simplicity of a man who has decided to say an uncomplicated thing and is not going to make it complicated, that the evenings were cold in this wing of the house, and he did not know whether she had enough coal at her grate. She had sufficient coal. He stayed for an hour anyway, in the chair by the window that he had drawn into the office on the 2nd day and had not returned to the corridor. He read his own correspondence. She read the ledgers. Neither of them looked across the room at the other, and neither of them for a single minute was unaware of the precise position of the other in the room. When he left, he said good night. She answered in kind. The following evening, he came again. Same hour, same chair, same 2 cups of coffee. Same quality of silence, which was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who have sufficient to say and are in no particular hurry. On the 3rd evening, she had a question about the Eastern property receipts, and she asked it across the room without turning from the desk, and he answered from his chair without lowering his letter. And the answer was correct, and she said so. And he said nothing to that, but she heard from the chair, the smallest, driest, most contained exhalation of amusement she had ever heard a man produce in an estate office. She found after that she did not sleep well on the evenings he did not come. She did not account for this. She was too careful a woman to account for things before she had sufficient data. He had James with him at breakfast on the 9th morning when Clara came down, and they were not eating. They were sitting across from one another with a piece of paper between them on which James had drawn something that the Duke was studying with the grave and complete attention he brought to the ledger columns. "It is a horse," James said. "I see that now," the Duke said. "You didn't see it before?" "I was looking at it from the wrong angle." He turned the paper. "From here, it is clearly a horse." James looked at the paper from the Duke's angle. He appeared to agree that this was a better angle. He took the paper back and began adjusting the drawing. The Duke watched him with the look Clara had come to recognize across 9 mornings. It was the look of a man who has been handed something he did not allow himself to plan for, and is still, daily, surprised by how much room it takes up. She sat down. She poured her coffee. She said good morning to James, who said good morning back, without looking up from the horse. The Duke said her name across the table. She gave him his. "James has asked to see the gallery portraits," he said, after breakfast. "I thought, if you were not occupied with the accounts, you might—" "I would like to see the gallery," she said, before he finished. He looked at her. The small, brief, genuine half-smile gone before James looked up from the horse. After breakfast, the 3 of them walked the long gallery together, James between them, stopping at each portrait with the meticulous attention of a child conducting a formal inventory. He examined the eyes in every frame. He examined the jawlines. At the 5th portrait, which was the Duke's grandfather, he stood for a very long time. "He has my nose," James said. "He does," Charles said. "And my ears." He touched his own ear, confirming. "The left one goes like this." He demonstrated the particular angle. "Exactly like that," the Duke said, "for 4 generations at least." James appeared to find this enormously satisfying. He moved on to the next portrait with the brisk step of a boy who has found what he came to find and is now simply confirming the inventory. Clara walked beside the Duke and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. She was aware of the precise distance between them on the gallery floor, and she was aware that it was, for the first time in 10 days, a distance chosen rather than maintained. The confrontation, when it came, did not happen in a drawing room. It happened on the 2nd Tuesday of December, in the estate office, at Reginald Alden's own request. He had received the previous Thursday the formal letter from Mr. Hale regarding the account discrepancies and the request for all correspondence related to the Shropshire arrangement. He had received it in his house in the village with the particular, fleeting expression of a man who has been stepping carefully around a weakness in a floor for 7 years and has finally heard it give. He arrived at the estate office in his best coat. He was 51, gray-haired, broad through the shoulders, with the smooth, unhurried manner of a man who had spent decades being the most trusted person in every room and had not been wrong about that until now. He was not a monster in a coat. He was a man who had made one calculation 40 years ago, that his cousin had been born into something that should by rights have also been his, and had been quietly, precisely, building a correction to that calculation ever since. He had been Charles's closest friend at school. He had been the one who sat with Charles the night his father died. He had been the one who said, when the fever letter arrived from Shropshire, "I am sorry, old man," in the exact tone of a man who meant it. He had meant it. Clara had understood this, reading the ledgers. It made him more difficult than a man who did not mean it. It made the room harder to stand in. He came in and saw her at the desk. He had not known she was there. That was the first small fracture in the prepared composure. "Miss Sutton is my estate accountant," the Duke said quietly from the chair at the window. "I see." Reginald looked at the desk, at the 3 columns, at the ledgers open to their marked pages. His face was still. He was, she noted, a man who had been skilled for a very long time at making his face still. "Please, sit down," Clara said. He sat. She took him through it column by column. She did not rush. She did not perform. She placed each piece before him the way she had placed it before the Duke, and she watched with the same attention she gave to accounts as the color moved in his face. He tried confusion. She showed him the figures. He tried explanation. She showed him the tenant letters. He tried appeal. He turned not to Clara but to the Duke, with the instinct of a man retreating to ground where he had always been safe. Charles. His voice was low. It was the first time he had used the given name, the school name, the name from the nights when one of them sat with the other in some corridor of trouble. "We have known each other since we were 8 years old," the Duke said, from the window, very quietly. "My name in this office is Your Grace." Reginald closed his mouth. "There is also," Clara said, "the matter of Miss Elizabeth Marsh." The composure did not shatter. It did not need to. It simply became, in the space of one breath, a different kind of stillness. The stillness of a man who has known for 11 years that a particular door existed and has spent 11 years not looking at it. "The payments to the Shropshire solicitors have been traced," she said. "The correspondence held by the firm has been obtained. The letter informing the Duke of Miss Marsh's death, written from this house in October of 1836 inches, a hand that was not Miss Marsh's has been identified." She let a beat pass. "James Marsh is 7 years old. He is in this house. He is at this moment, I believe, in the library with the Duke's copy of Aesop and the large dog that should not be in the library but has been in the library every afternoon for a week." Something happened then in Reginald Alden's face that was not calculation. It was, briefly and without performance, something else. He looked at the desk. He looked at his own hands on his knees. "He is well?" he said. His voice had changed on the question. It had become the voice he used when he was not managing an impression. "He is well," Clara said. "He found an error in the 3rd column on his 4th day here." A long silence. Reginald looked at his hands for some time. "I told myself," he said, and then did not finish the sentence. "You told yourself he was provided for," Clara said, "not unkindly, because unkindness was not required when precision was sufficient. You told yourself the arrangement was a mercy. You told yourself a great many things over 11 years. The ledgers tell me what the things were and the order in which you told them. The ledgers do not tell me that you believed them, but I think you did. I think that is, in its own way, the part you will find the hardest to live with." Reginald Alden looked at her for a moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has said an accurate thing he did not expect to hear in an estate office on a Tuesday morning. He did not speak again after that. The matter had been referred to the London Gazette and to the appropriate legal authorities, she told him. The proceedings would not be quiet, would not be brief, and would not be settled privately. She said it in the leveled tone of a woman who has already closed a door. He stood. He straightened his coat with the small, automatic dignity of a man performing a habitual gesture, because the habits are all that remain of the person he was an hour ago. He looked, finally, at the Duke at the window. Charles had not moved from the chair. He was looking at his cousin with the look that was not anger and was not grief precisely, but was the specific expression of a man watching the end of something that had been good for a long time before it was not. "I am sorry, Charles," Reginald said. He used the name one last time. It was not a strategy. It was the only thing he had left that was genuinely his. The Duke said nothing. He let the apology stand in the room without receiving it. That was not cruelty. It was honesty, which was the only currency left between them. Reginald Alden walked out of the estate office, through the corridor, past the open door of the library where a boy was reading beside a large dog that should not have been in the library. And he did not look in as he passed, and he went out of Colchester Hall and into the December afternoon and did not come back. He did not leave the county. He had not, by the time the legal proceedings were concluded, the resources to go far. The Colchester estate reclaimed £4,800 across 3 years of proceedings. The timber rights were restored by court order. The falsified death report, combined with the intercepted letters and the Shropshire correspondence, resulted in charges that were reported in the London Gazette on a Wednesday morning and were still being discussed in county drawing rooms the following month. He was stripped of all estate appointments. He was ordered to repay the diverted amounts at a rate that would occupy the remainder of what had been a comfortable life. He retired to a small property in Wiltshire and kept largely to himself. He was not, in the end, a ruined man, in the dramatic sense. He was a reduced man, which is a different thing, and in some ways, a longer sentence. He had for 40 years been the most trusted person in every room he entered, and he was not that anymore, and he knew it. And he lived with the knowledge in the specific way a man lives with a thing he cannot put down and cannot carry lightly. He had told himself, for 11 years, that the boy was provided for. He had been right about that, in the end, in ways he had not intended. James Marsh was confirmed by ecclesiastical and legal proceedings as James Marsh Alden in April of 1848, 2 weeks before his 8th birthday. His father told him in the library, sitting on the floor, because James had been on the floor with Aesop, and the Duke had sat down to be level with him and had decided, once there, that the floor was a sufficient place for important news. James listened to the whole of it with his particular, careful attention. He looked at the floor when it was finished. He looked at the ceiling beam. He looked at the Duke. "So I may keep Marsh?" "You may keep Marsh. It was your mother's name. It is not a name to put down." "James Marsh Alden," he said slowly, testing the weight of it. "If you like." "I like it." He picked up Aesop again, with the clean completeness of a child who has finished one thing and returned to the next. The dog, who had been listening from the hearth with the patient attention of a large dog who considers himself a participant in all domestic proceedings, settled his chin back onto his paws. Charles sat on the library floor for another quarter of an hour with his back against the shelf. He looked at the room his father had read in, and his grandfather before him, and at the boy reading in it now, with one hand absently resting on the back of the large dog, and he felt, for the first time in 11 years, that the library was full rather than empty. Clara Sutton had said she would stay until the ledgers no longer needed reading. The ledgers were in order by February. She stayed until the spring because James asked her to, with the direct and unanswerable simplicity of a child who states his requirements without having learned yet to manage the inconvenience of them for others. He asked her at breakfast on a Tuesday morning with the Duke sitting across from him, and neither of them looked at the other when he asked, and neither of them pretended not to hear it. She had her reasons of her own. She did not account for them at breakfast. She was too careful a woman to account for a thing before she was certain of the figures. On a Thursday morning in March, the Duke walked with her to the end of the orchard path and stopped. The thin spring sun was coming through the bare branches, and somewhere in the kitchen garden behind the wall, a bird was doing something noisy and optimistic. He told her he was grateful. She said she was glad the accounts were in order. He said he was not speaking of the accounts. She looked at the orchard for a moment. Then she said that she had stayed, this past month, somewhat past the point the accounts required. He said that he had noticed. She said that she would stay, if it suited him, through the summer, to ensure the first season of proper management concluded without error. He said that it suited him very well. He said it in the level, careful tone she had spent 4 months learning to read, which was the tone he used for everything he meant more than he said. He did not reach for her. He stood beside her at the end of the orchard path in the thin March sun and offered her the silence and the season. She stayed through the summer. She stayed through the autumn, through the winter, through another spring. In October of 1849, on the anniversary of the evening a boy had arrived at a gate in the November fog. Clara walked across the long hall of Colchester Hall, with her hand on the arm of the Duke of Colchester, and became by every measure she was willing to count, precisely where her own careful arithmetic had not in the beginning thought to place her. She became his wife. She became James's mother in the way the word means something beyond the document, which is the only way it means anything at all. She kept her desk in the estate office. The Duke kept his chair by the window. No one suggested either arrangement should change. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the year after their marriage, James Alden, age 9, in the middle of a Latin declension he had decided to take a break from, came into the estate office and found Clara at the desk and his father at the window with a letter. He dropped his grammar in the chair, climbed into the other, and looked at the columns on Clara's desk with the attentive, unhurried gaze of a boy who had been watching a woman read accounts for a year and had concluded it was a thing worth learning. "What are those?" he said. She showed him. He studied them. After a moment, He pointed to the third column. That number is written twice. She looked. He was correct. A duplication, small, but precise, exactly where he had pointed. Exactly as he had done, for the first time, on his fourth morning in this house, at this desk, in this office, 2 years ago. She corrected it without ceremony, because he had found it without ceremony, and they were both the kind of people who did not require applause for the finding. His father, at the window, said nothing. He looked at his wife and his son at the desk in the late autumn light, and held the look for the space of one long, quiet breath, in the way a man holds a thing he has decided he will not take for granted. "James," he said, "have you had breakfast?" James had not. They went to breakfast. The estate office held their warmth for another hour, in the specific way of rooms that have been well used by people who are glad to be in them. The columns stood corrected in Clara's clean hand. The ledgers were in order. The accounts of Colchester Hall, for the first time in 7 years, reflected precisely what was there. Nothing missing, nothing hidden, nothing owed. In the breakfast room, at the window seat, with the late autumn sun falling through the orchard glass onto the back of her hand where it rested on the table, Clara drank her coffee. Her husband poured a second cup and set it in front of her without being asked. The way a man performs a small act, he has performed enough mornings that it has ceased to be a gesture, and become instead simply a true thing. James was explaining to the dog, who had come in despite all instructions to the contrary, the precise rules of Latin declension. The dog was listening with the grave and patient attention he brought to every explanation offered in his presence, which was one of the dog's finer qualities. Charles looked at his wife across the table. "You are watching me," she said. "I am. To what end?" "To the end," he said, "of remembering that this is what a Tuesday is." She looked at him over the cup. "It is, in fact, a Thursday." "It is in any case," he said, "the morning on which my wife has her coffee in the window seat, and my son is teaching Latin to a dog who should not be in the breakfast room, in the house where a boy arrived at a gate 2 years ago, and every Tuesday since has been better than the one before it. I would like to remember it, regardless of which day it technically is." She did not answer that. She looked out at the orchard, in the late autumn sun, and at the accounts in order in the office down the hall, and at her son conducting a grammar lesson for an ineligible student, and at her husband, watching her with the careful, unhurried attention of a man who has learned, late but not too late, to look at the things in front of him before someone teaches him they were there. She lifted her cup. It was, she discovered, very good coffee. If you have ever had something taken from you quietly, by someone you trusted, in a room where no one else was watching, and found your way back to it by a road that did not look like the one you had planned, I would very much like to read your account of it in the comments below. My name is Author. I write stories of good people who learn, late but not too late, to let the right ones show them where to look. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it today. And if you would like the next one waiting for you, subscribe. There is always another by the next firelight.